Welcome back to Set the Standard, your number one father-daughter podcast in the world.
Yes, for sure.
We're setting the standard, the Selden standard today. So we're a couple episodes in, and it's feeling good. It's feeling flowy. We're learning new things, watching things back. I think starting a podcast, it's a whole different beast from what I'm used to.
Mm-hmm.
I've made music, made YouTube videos, vlogs, makeup tutorials, TikToks, Instagram stuff. This is just completely different, but also cool and a new adventure. So today we have a topic that both my dad and I are kind of experts on in different ways.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? You're not, out of your relationship. I don't know if you're the expert. You've got, but it just all depends. I feel like on this topic of divorce and divorced parents and what you go through, there's two different perspectives here, which is what this podcast is all about, right? I mean, I feel like your perspective of a divorce, because your parents were never divorced and my grandparents were never divorced. So I got to see both those two sets of parents happy, but both, obviously my dad had been divorced before, and then so is now his wife. And then, so I got to see and hear stories of both sides, actually.
Yep.
So today we're going to kind of be covering three main big topics. So how does it affect us as kids and adults? And how does it affect the parents, right? Rejection, all of that. And then if we're going to tie it all together in one, what are similarities that you take away and either learn from a divorce, see the positive side, and maybe the negative lingering things? So we'll start with how it affects the kids, because I was a kid of divorce. And maybe if you're sitting here and you're listening, you're going, well, my parents are still married and that's so amazing. But maybe you have a friend, a cousin, someone close to you that is experiencing it, has experienced it, and has trauma from it. So maybe we can just give you some insight, right?
Yeah, well, I would mention that divorce, we think of in a marital standpoint, but we had a podcast on dating. And oftentimes when you have a breakup, say in a long-term relationship, the emotions can be similar to a divorce.
Very true.
Yeah. So I think this applies not only to, the folks that have been married and go through divorce, but also for those of you who have been in a long-term relationship that ends in a breakup, quote, divorce. And there's, maybe there's kids involved even in that scenario. So I think it applies all around. And I think why this became a topic was in the many discussions, Genelle, I had for a long time, since the divorce, that starts off with trying to understand why, depending on the age of the kids too, that's a big deal. Like
you think that makes a difference?
Yeah, your younger brother, might be more impacted
than me.
Maybe.
Okay.
You're
right. It can vary based on personality.
It depends on the kid's personality. It depends on where the parents are at, which we're going to get into, how they respond. Some parents go
financial
off the deep
situations.
Yep. Some parents go off the deep end. Remember, the parents are, emotionally affected. One of them was rejected. The final rejection comes with the ultimatum. The ultimatum is where you might be going along and it's kind of back and forth, right?
Or one feels neglected at first, so they stray away.
Sure.
Got it.
But in the end, there has to be some finality to it. Now, in a divorce, there's both the physical separation and then there's the legal documentation. So you kind of go through two. And in our state, they even require you, as you're divorcing, to go to a mandatory class. You have to go to together. Before
you get divorced?
Yeah, and you're already kind of down the path. I think it's kind of their way of
saying they tried.
Well, and it's the meeting you go to is more about the kids than it is you, but it's an emotional kind of thing, and it tries to affect you.
You said something that just sparked my mind. That's so, I didn't know that they would make you, I could see why maybe states would make you go to a counseling class or something, because don't certain states, aren't they seen based on marriage rates? Like how many are married and stay married? Does anyone get any perks in their state? Like let's say Texas, for instance, this is hypothetical. 80% of our people here that got married stay married. So they get extra. Does anyone get any bonuses because they like made married people stay married?
No,
Wouldn't that be interesting?
Well, there's probably some data out there on that, but I think the national divorce rate, surprisingly, it's pretty high right now. But it's been high in the past, decades ago. It's something that goes. Marriage becomes a very traditional and sometimes based on religion. It's a thing,
right?
And then there's times where living together is the more popular choice. That's why you've seen laws where they say, well, if you've been married for 7 years, or living together for X amount of years, that is considered marriage as it relates to assets and so forth, which we don't want to get into all that. But
yeah, we'll start with the kids and how it affects them.
Yes, I think the idea here is we're going to give the two perspectives.
Yeah.
And then sort of how we work through those challenges that we both, and there's overlap, obviously. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to go through that, and then just some thoughts, and you'll maybe pick up some ideas along the way. So I think, from a kid standpoint and maybe the age, you were, maybe give your perspective and then how you felt, some of the emotions. How did you were able to stay focused on your life, the whole going back and forth and all the baloney that happens when you really knew your parents were going to be divorced, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think since I was older, I'm the oldest, and I'm sorry, we're just getting started with this podcast, so we need to introduce ourselves every episode because we could be gaining new people every title. So I'm Genelle, if you don't know who I am, and this is my dad, so we're doing this together, so that's kind of how we come together.
That's right.
But I was older. I was the oldest. I was about 10 years old when it was going on. And then my littlest brother was 4. So clearly we saw different things. I saw a lot of the early fighting, right? Where like maybe my little brothers had already been put down to bed. I was awake still. I was curious. I also was just like a snoopy kid. I was always, being nosy in any adult situation. I was just like that, curious, So I think with my particular situation, it's so funny. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking while we're talking about this, my mom and I, it's not like we got along in the early stages, but there was some tension. So it makes me wonder, I was so upset when the divorce was happening. And as any kid, most children are upset. They don't want their parents apart, but it's not like I was like, to my dad, I don't remember being like, well, mom's the best, you got to stay with mom, or mom, dad's, the best. It was almost like I just felt something just tearing apart, and I just didn't want that tearing apart. Even if now I look back, maybe it was probably for the better at the time. There was just, I think, instead of it being a clean rip, there was like a rip. And then my parents did at one point, they did try to save the marriage, and they did reconcile at one brief point. Mm-hmm. So I remember I was through, I think of a sailboat going through a storm, right? Noah's Ark, let's just say, he's going through the water and it's treacherous. Shout out Noah. But I think for me, I saw a lot of that, and I know my brothers did too, but I think I really saw it, just this slow burn. And on top of the really slow burn from start to finish, my mom and I's relationship really deteriorated from the time I was a preteen at that point, because I think I was 10 when it was really happening, and then it was like final done. I was probably 11, 12, and then it was, you guys were separate. And that's my recollection, that's my memory.
Did you think it was done? Because oftentimes kids still are hopeful that their parents are going to get back together. So did you, as you recall, did you think there was still that opportunity, or once you saw us, quote, dating other people, that wasn't going to happen? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I think there was some hope, I think, in the beginning. that first split. Because my mom, now we don't need to get into all the dirty details here, but my mom did move.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
Well, we separated.
Yeah. Yep. Like she wasn't, because some people will still stay in the house.
Yeah, that's not that common.
Okay.
It's really not.
People leave. Okay, they figure it out. Got it. Yeah. I haven't been divorced yet, but you're right. That actually makes sense.
Yes.
Okay, got it. So I think that when there was a reconciliation, I think I maybe did have some more hope that when the second time came around to split, I was like, oh, it's a phase. Ma and dad are fighting, whatever. But it got pretty dark. And on one of the parents' ends, it got darker and darker. So to me, it turned into almost this, I knew that it was just bad from if I looked at the parents individually. At one point I did see a parent in just such a bad place where I was like, wow, this isn't even about them not getting along. This is just, we've entered different dark stages. So I think to answer your question, there was, but I think when it was really done, when I was like 12, I don't think I had hope. I was just then bothered about the dating process, which we'll get into. So
okay. So kind of the phases, you see your parents arguing and fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that wasn't normal for the whole time of your childhood, but then you saw a greater amount of that.
Right.
And then you learned that we were separating, living apart. And then you were in this back and forth scenario. And I think I remember too that we used to pack your clothes up.
Yep.
So like in a little suitcase.
Yeah, before we had separate closets and stuff.
Yeah, so you would have to go back and forth with your clothes.
Yep.
How did that feel? I mean, what was that like?
Gosh.
Or you don't
It's
remember.
so funny. The pivotal things that really highlight in our mind are not the small things like that. I think packing the clothes, and because Nana and Papa, my mother's parents were really prevalent in my life as a young kid, and my parents would pack me up for maybe a day or so. I remember I'd have little clothes at their house. So that didn't feel so foreign to me. What was foreign was the intensity and the toxicity that I think was happening, because it got very up and down, high and low. And not that everyone goes through divorce does this, but I will say, even coming from a relationship, I was in a long-term relationship. I was not married. But as things got bad at times, it was very hot and then very cold. So I think those were pivotal moments. So the back and forth, to me, it'd be interesting to see what my brothers would say. I think I felt it wasn't super foreign. We're going to Nana and Papa's for a few days. We're going to Mom's.
Because we every other week.
Yes.
Is what we did. And so, as I think about this topic, and maybe this will help folks out there, is that there's really phases from the adult side of things. When you first go through the phase of the deterioration of the relationship, and I imagine that goes through people have different experiences, but there's definitely some hard feelings. Might be a middle way to say it. There's probably some hate. There's probably some anger. There's all kinds of emotions that happen during a breakup and as the breakup's going on. When there's kids involved, what happens oftentimes is that the children get lost in all of that. And why that happens is you've got two adults who are going through various emotions themselves. In some instances, one adult has already found a new person, which creates problem, a whole nother set of problems.
Yep.
And then you have another adult who's rejected, as I mentioned,
Yep.
and they're reeling and trying to get there. So meanwhile, the kids are sort of in this state of just being kind of flipped back and forth.
But what do you say? I can kind of see that,
Well, that's kind of where I think for me, the light went on at some point. Not some point. When I realized that, I was going to be divorced, I had to sort of, and this is where, I hope this helps somebody out there. I realized, number one, I had a whole life in front of me, and I wasn't about to let my life become this all about this event in my life. As horrible as it was, and there's a lot of horrible things that people go through in life.
Right.
Divorce is definitely, they say it's the closest thing to dealing with death
Yeah.
in your life. I knew that, number one, I didn't want my life to be all about that. As much as it hurt, and it did, and I had some dark days.
And consumed your mind, probably.
It did.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing, and maybe even this is one and 1A, is I had 3 kids that I had to, number one, make sure that they stayed focused in their lives because they had to go to school, stay healthy, still have friends, have a life, right? Kids are really messed up from divorce. You know, they're actually, in my opinion, they get the worst end of it.
You always say this.
Yeah, adults usually can figure it out. Even if they do stupid things, you know, where they go out and start partying,
right.
But the kids are just in this really bad, and the younger can be worse, can be better. It depends. You know, one of your cousins was only 3, and she has a different opinion or thoughts on it.
Yep, my
so
cousin.
we're not trying to. This is why when we talk about standards, this is in particular one that was within, you know, I mean, your brother was 5 years old, so he was pretty young too.
Yep.
And so, so as the adult sort of really has to raise themselves back up, it's really a pep talk. It's really whatever you need. If you go to counseling, and I should mention that we did try counseling, and maybe that works for some people. I would encourage that.
Oh yeah, did you find any success?
You know, I think counseling, a lot of that has to do with both parties being willing to roll up their sleeves, and maybe there's a stage in the part of the relationship, maybe it's going sideways, where counseling would really come in and help. And I'm sure there's people out there going, yeah, counseling saved our marriage and saved our relationship. It didn't for us. It didn't work. And I just think we were in our situation was one person definitely wanted to move on. And so if you're in that state of mind, you're not going to be thinking, hey, I want to fix my marriage. You know, let's really work hard at this, because it takes work. And I don't ever want to suggest to anybody that any relationship you have is going to take work. And if you're not willing to, whether we're talking about dating, we talk about divorce, we'll talk about marriage, we'll talk about a lot of things. So I think it's important to understand you have to have a great relationship and be willing to roll up your sleeves and put in the work. So back to the phases. So as you guys saw, now your parents are living apart. Now a year goes by, let's say.
Well, I just want to make a comment off of the rejection piece, because like you had just mentioned, we talked a little bit about the rejection side. I will say, coming from a kid from a divorced parent, I felt rejected, because then I felt, you know, the weeks I was with my one parent, you know, specifically one of them, they were going out. So I was like, oh, well, why don't you want to stay in and hang out with me? Oh, well, you know, I'll be back in a little bit. So then I kind of felt like, okay, so I don't have another parent to lean on because I'm with this parent this week. So I'm just with my brothers. So I started to build this rejection. And then when I remember specifically, there were moments, obviously my dad wanted to move on and he wanted to continue on his life. And that goes for going on a coffee date, dinner date, whatever. I would notice, because I was nosy, or I'd listen, or I'd hear something, or I'd suspect. And I felt rejected because I was like, well, why? I didn't have a reason, but I just felt that rejection. So I just wanted to add that in before, you know, we moved on to the back and forth again and whatever. I wanted to add my piece in as a child. I then felt rejected in the divorce from each parent at different moments. So
yeah, I think where I was going was the phases, and
right.
The phase that a parent also feels alone, the children feel alone, your kids feel rejected, the adults feel rejected, maybe one feels rejected. So as you can see, this is a real, you know, concoction of emotions and feelings, and all these things are happening. And sometimes it's really hard to get a handle on all that. Your anger, you're mad, you know, you're frustrated, you're all these things. And so at some point, and time heals, by the way, I'm a big believer in that. You have to really pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Now, I had great family around to support me. You know, my faith was important. And so anyway, as I moved on, the second phase is when you start kind of your life again. And this is different for everyone. One of the things that I remember thinking to myself is, am I going to let what happened damage me for the rest of my life? Meaning, am I not going to, ever find love again? Am I not going to want to be in love? Am I going to, do the I'll never get married again?
Did you ever do that?
Oh, sure.
You did?
Well, I think everybody's a little, but you're doing it and you're allowing what happened to you dictate your life. So then I moved past that. I'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
So what I'm just I'm describing this idea that, okay, I've gone through all this pain and, all these problems, life has gone on, I've continued to go to work, get you guys to your events and school and all these different things. And then you realize, in my case, it was every other week. So I had a whole week, which at first felt really weird because you used to come home to a house full of energy and kids running around and to now nothing. And so it's a very bizarre time. Once I got myself past that, then I realized, okay, I have to get into a rhythm here in life, I'm a very
a whole different routine.
I do things, go to work out, have you guys. So when you're with me, there's certain expectations, homework and so forth. What I knew I needed to provide for you guys when you were with me was a routine. We're going to eat, we're going to do homework, we're going to do this, go to bed, get up, and so on. And so when you came and stayed with me, you would feel as though this routine, you got used to it and you knew what to expect.
Right.
On the other side, you were not finding that. There was some things happening there where you guys would come to me and you'd say, hey, tell me kind of what was going on at the other house. And it wasn't working for you guys. And so in different states, you can't just take your kids. It's very challenging.
There's
sometimes.
A certain age that a kid gets to decide.
Yes. And so while that was happening, I realized, hey, I needed to kind of start my life back up.
So how did you handle, before you kind of get in, how did you handle the utmost rejection? What was your kind of go-to, give three things?
Yeah, number one, I know I'm a good person. Deep down inside.
So self-love you started with, looking in the mirror.
It was always, and I had my parents and my other family members.
So a support system.
Yeah, because listen, I took responsibility for my, people say when you get divorced, well, whose fault was it? Well, it's both people's faults. Now, is it 60, 40, 70, 30, 80, 20? You could debate that all day long. I had some responsibility in the breakup of the relationship.
But you still got a lot of rejection.
Yeah,
so I would say your top three things that you just said were finding self-love and knowing your self-worth, having a good support system. I'm just trying to give any tips for people out there. And then number three.
Yeah, well, I think those are the big ones. And I think you realize, and you have to stabilize the kids, make sure that there's some harmony there. And that's hard because you're dealing with another person. And so then you realize I can only control what I can control. There's a lot I can't control. And so when I started focusing on, and you'll hear me use that often, then I realized, okay, so at some point, while I was coming out of this darkness, I always tell people, you and I, because you were the oldest and you were always, asking questions and so forth, I'd say, hey, listen, if you ever feel that you would like to live with me full time, you're welcome to do that.
You did say that.
And of course, I didn't go to court to make that happen. I knew that there was a time where you could make that decision. And eventually you did. So the thing that I want to talk about is the divorced parent dating. And this was something I consciously told myself as well. The last thing I wanted to do was bring other people into your kids' lives and have you maybe meet people and not accept them. That happens a lot. Or two, maybe you like this person and then it doesn't work out.
You were very careful about that.
That's right. You didn't see a revolving door of these people coming in, and I can't control what was happening on the other end. So I made a conscious effort and when I finally did meet someone that I felt was that I wanted you guys to meet, I had already known this person for probably 9 months and maybe longer. I don't remember the exact amount. But then I felt, okay, I would like for my kids to meet this person.
It felt stable.
Well, I knew what kind of person I was dealing with. It was more about bringing someone in that I knew was of quality and that was going to and they felt the same about me because I met their children. And then I knew they had kids, I had kids, the whole thing.
Right.
So I think the phases of this is after the phase 2 and the phase 3, when you really start sort of getting your equilibrium. And, while you're raising your kids, you're always going to have, even if you stay married, you go through challenges with your kids. When you're divorced, those challenges are probably a little amplified, because sometimes you are working together still for it's really important if the parents, after they get over hating each other, because there's some of that, and you always hear about parents who still remain friends, but it really comes back to how can we mutually raise our children. We didn't really have that, unfortunately. We tried, and I ultimately ended up doing the majority of that.
Yeah.
And so I was okay with that. I don't have any complaints on that. And, we did the best.
You didn't ever show that it was like a bummer.
No, it was imperative to get you guys through your high school years without any major events happening, bad things, drinking, drugs, pregnancies, what have you, and then get you focused on your lives and going to college and all those kinds of things. And so, listen, it was an effort, both by me getting uplifted by the right people in my life, but also the type of person I am, that I was going to move on with my life. Because once I pulled my head out of this swamp, I'm like, hey, I got a whole life here to live. Because one day, as I thought ahead, you guys are going to grow up and move on, and I'm going to be by myself. And I was like, I didn't want to be by myself.
No,
I like having someone in my life. So I made sure that you guys were stabilized and that you were moving forward, and you were, kind of creating your life for yourself. And that's why I took the time to make sure, when you decided to go to college, your brothers decided to go to college, that I invested the time in that, and which I would have done anyway, but it was more imperative because the other individual wasn't involved. So I just wanted to make sure that life continued on as it should. And so that phase of now being focused gave you guys stability. You saw when you were with me, and by the way, Genelle did come and live with me, as did her, both brothers eventually.
But at different moments.
At different times, because they were apart in the
And I think we started driving. So I think that's how it was able to
that
kind
helped.
of.
That's right.
We would beat bop around. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I guess for you, did you see these phases develop? Or did you feel there was turmoil for a longer period of time? Like in your mind, it was chaotic until you came and lived with me, and then it sort of leveled off? Or how would you describe those phases?
I think I saw the phases. Yeah. So I would say from my perspective, because you need to remind me on the phases you just named so people can remember here. The phases I think I saw is I first saw the rejection, right? And I saw the hanging by a thread moment. And then the second phase, I saw the letting go and kind of the dark, they would call them black days, where you just like had days where you're like, what did I even do? What did I think about? And I've had days like that now, since you've mentioned. I remember as a kid, after you healed, you would tell me how you felt, because I was helping. I remember you were also then, we're not getting into all the details, but around when my parents' marriage went, there was a job shift for you. And I remember not only positive, right? Positive job shift. Although you did go through a hardship to get to the positive as well.
Sure.
I saw my dad in his vulnerable moments, not only with a relationship, but in his career. And he did bounce back. I mean, there was no phases there. It was like a bounce back. But I remember you still not being.
Well, you saw me at probably some of my lowest points. You didn't know that.
No.
But you did. But you also saw me come out of.
You know why? I also, as a kid, I was selfish, right? So I was also focused on my own pain. So maybe it's almost not a good thing. But I don't remember really. I obviously saw you rejected. You were not happy about it. You kind of always said, the other party is going to do what they got to do. I'm going to do what I got to do. This is how we got to go. But I don't remember, maybe the moments, maybe when you did show, because I was also trying to fight
Sure.
the pain.
Well, I think it's pretty important that I was conscious of the fact that you guys were watching me, even though when I say watching me, you were observing. That's why I made the decision not to bring all these different people into your lives. But number two, by you seeing that I had perseverance, so much, and when we'll get into raising kids, and we'll have a good podcast about discipline and all that. So much of how we raise our children is the environment that they're in, providing safe environment, providing, a loving environment, all those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And in this scenario, I wanted you guys to see that when their adversity strikes, and it was coming at me in a couple different angles, and while I had my moments,
adversity.
Yeah, well,
when adversity strikes.
Well, they say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
You've always said that.
And, so I was like, okay, self-talk, right? We'll talk a lot about that. I'm talking to myself. I'm going, all right, I have to be a light for my children. I have my kids need to see that I'm a stable individual, that I get after life. I don't sit around and mope and cry and drink myself to death, that I'm going to get after life. I'm going to make a comfortable home for my kids. I'm going to provide and help them with their lives.
That's a real man, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, it's the way I was at our grandma that we talk about often.
She was very much that.
She was a very stable,
Yep.
My dad was too. My dad.
Right.
We'll talk about my dad in the future too. I mean, he was a military guy, just 18 years old. He was drafted. I mean, he for a man that went through quite a bit, he did his part too in creating. I saw how he treated my mother and how he worked and how he provided a home for us. We never had a lot, but we had what we needed.
Yeah, both your parents, obviously I didn't grow up with them, but made sure to show all you guys that they could provide.
Well, I was a reflection of that. And by the way, when I was going through all this, we've already mentioned this, but they were in my corner, and I talked to them about it, and they were like, yeah, hey, we're here for you, whatever you need. So that's important to have that, no doubt. But again, just to really tie this up, I knew that I had to persevere for my kids' sake and my sake. And if I did that, wasn't a guarantee, because there are no guarantees in life except death and taxes, another thing my dad would say.
A quote.
But also,
we got some good quotes in here.
Yeah, but I just knew that, okay, so, Genelle's watching me and her brothers are watching me, and, I'm going to show them how you do this thing. And so then when I did meet, the gal that I knew was going to be in my life, I brought her around. Wasn't easy. You can speak to that. Gosh, how did you feel?
I don't know if I remember really meeting. It's
well,
so
at
weird.
Some point you knew she was my girlfriend.
Right. It's so weird sitting here thinking about the first couple of years with your partner now is
my wife.
Yep. Yes, your wife now is such a blur to me. I don't know if it's because I was emotionally dealing with other things, right? Because I got into a relationship at a young age. I started dating someone at the end-ish of 15. And then, that was a young, drama. And I also was having, tension with the other parent, because what happened is, if, I'm speaking to the ladies out there that also have a mom, I think you just bump heads. I even had other friends who were close with their mom. It was hard when you're in your teens as a woman to a woman, or a woman growing into a woman with another woman. That was already my tension too. So not only did I have to deal with the divorce, I then was dealing with just being like a teen that was kind of confused, lost. I was the only girl, and then when I was with my dad and my brothers, lots of guys, right? And I had a couple really cool, close besties, but I struggled with friendships sometimes. And, I wasn't the best in school, but I wasn't the worst. I was decent. So I think when your wife came around, now his wife, but at the time they were dating, it's kind of a blur. Do you remember me being...
Well, I think you were a type of daughter. You were possessive of me in some ways.
I was. It was very weird.
Yeah, you were, and possessive may not be the right word. I think you were.
I just didn't want to share. I was like, who's...
No, you know what it is? You're fearful of another breakup. I mean, you may not have realized that, but deep down inside, you're going, man, my dad was pretty messed up from this other deal. I don't want to see him go through that again. You don't know enough to know that, but in the back of your mind.
Yeah, there was something.
Plus you were, and still are, the type of person where you liked the attention. You wanted the attention.
I did.
Right?
I do like the attention.
Yeah, and you don't like it when it was that way. So one of the things I also did while I was, once I introduced Terry was, and Terry has children as well. We couldn't, it wasn't like we all got together and had dinner all the time. It took a while to get there. So it was still, even after I introduced her, it wasn't like we were together every night. She had a career and a life. She was living her life. I'd see her on the weekends, and sometimes I would only see her when you guys were with your mom. Now, when you all lived with me, moved in, it was a different situation. Then
because we all started to bunker up at your house.
Well, no,
there got to be a point where all three of us were.
Well, no,
there.
I know that, but it wasn't like Terry would.
You know what?
Come over and.
I don't think our youngest brother was with you full time ever.
He was he ultimately did. Yeah, he came, but it was in the end.
Okay.
So let's kind of. So the phases, again, as I said, when you get to this phase where you're sort of seeing.
So name your phases. Give us what you just went through.
I don't know if I would put a name to them. I think
Okay.
the first one is, as you're reeling from the divorce and you're trying to pick up the pieces.
Pick up the pieces.
The second is you start picking up the pieces, and third is the pieces fit together and you're moving on.
Okay, got it.
Is the way I would describe it.
Right.
And I think that
that's with any breakup, by the way. I think you just said it.
Again, speaking from the parent side of things, is that I realized that I could find love again, and I realized because there was a time where I didn't think so.
Why?
I think because I put so much into the relationship with your mother that I loved her. I did. That
actually makes sense.
I was pretty brokenhearted, and I mean I've never there's songs out there. We did the music podcast a little while ago about broken hearts. You're like, it's just a saying. I literally felt pain in my heart. I did. It was weird.
I've been there too.
Okay, so and if you're out there, I've
felt
sadly.
It's pain you can't escape, right?
You can't.
So like
it's in your head.
You've broken your wrist pretty bad. Mm-hmm. You were able to. If you wanted to,
ribs were more painful.
Right,
I broke my ribs.
But you can numb that. Literally, you can take. And I know you didn't, but like for me, I've had.
Well, people numb it. They go out and self-medicate.
It doesn't do.
Well, no, because you wake up and it's Groundhog Day every day. That's the thing. You go out, and it all goes away, and then you're back to where you are.
It doesn't work.
So what I think that I would leave, and I think you need to comment on this. Mm-hmm. You realize, and by the way. When the kids knew that I had their back, they knew they could count on me. They really did. They knew it. They knew that I was there for them. They knew, if there was a problem, they could come to me. They knew when it came time to college, I was going to be there for them, help them find what they wanted to go to school for or not go to school, whatever it was.
Happy Father's Day.
So, yes, thank you.
Father's Day here.
That's right. And so I think once they knew that I was an advocate for them, I was there for them, then that kind of helped them to focus now on their lives and move forward. So while they're focusing and moving forward on their lives, that's what I was doing as well. And I was finding, quite frankly, a better phase of life than I ever remember. And was living my best life in a lot of different ways. And I'm happy to tell you that I found, a great lady who she made me think differently on certain things and so forth. And so what's important is how would you say, when did you feel that you had moved on? While situations with your parents, sometimes I was talking with somebody yesterday, their parents got divorced when they were very young, but they've remained friends. We're talking 30 years.
Wow. They
still remain friends. In fact, he still goes there and cuts her lawn for her and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, wow.
Neither one of them remarried. They've never gotten, quote, back together, in a sexual way. They're just friends. And so, some people think how does that work?
That's a one in a. I don't think
that's not common.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people that manage to, your uncle and his ex-wife have done a tremendous job.
They have.
Staying focused on their daughter.
You're right.
It wasn't always that way. It wasn't always that way. They had some of the phases that we talked about. While some of this is still ongoing, meaning your parents are divorced, when did you feel you
moved on
and were just living your best life?
Wow, that's such an interesting question.
Like when you moved to California, when you
So
graduated college.
yeah. So I would say with the divorce came, you know, it's not like both of my parents divorced and both of them found their way, moved on, and like, became healthy individuals separately. And this is to keep things private. But what happened was I had the trauma from the divorce, and then it almost like that split off. So one side of it, it's like a split end of a hair. I was able to bond one side of the split end, but one kind of drifted off, and it was this lingering pain of not, the divorce had then healed, but I was still feeling pain and rejection from, maybe the aftermath of how my parent dealt with their issues and what they were going through. And obviously they weren't quote unquote the ones feeling rejected, but they still were dealing with issues internally, whatever that was. I'm not going to speak on their behalf. So I'm not going to lie. I finally felt like I was living my best life, doing my thing, moved on, felt clarity and felt peace fully up until maybe 2 years ago when I was like 27. Yeah, I was like 27.
Well, it's important to mention this. So oftentimes when two parents get divorced and they move on and those parents get remarried or whatever happens, the kids can, the kids become their own, they become adults. They can actually have great relationships with both parents, even though both, because both.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So we do have, in this situation, Genelle doesn't have a good relationship with her mother. Mm-mm. And so that lingers. So that part, it's hard to just kind of move past that.
Right. And I connect it. The only reason I say they're connected is because our relationship didn't start deteriorating until the aftermath of the divorce. So if I'm just speaking divorce and healing from the actual divorce, my parents being split up and them doing whatever they wanted their own way, it's their separate lives completely now, and they never really have to see each other again. I found peace in that, honestly, because of all the other junk that comes along with just like me being a teenager and just not getting along with the other parent. I would say I was like 17, 8. I think once your now wife came into the picture and she was, she had her own opinions, and at times I'd be like, well, I'm not listening to that. You know what I mean? Because as if you're a kid and your parent brings
that's a whole nother topic. Yeah.
Right.
Boy.
And I won't get into that, but I think because that then gave me still like, I had a little turmoil inside.
Yes.
I'm like, ugh.
Who are you to tell me what to do?
Yeah.
That's a fair,
like, why
that's
are you
fair
here? So there were times even later in my teenage years, right? I was going into college. She would give up an opinion and she was totally fine. I look back, it's fine. But there were times, she was in his life now. So she's like, I'll share my opinion. I'd be like, right. Excuse me, I wasn't looking at you, But
so that's another phase. We could probably do divorce part 2 is that how do you deal then? In this case, we chose not to all live under one roof, meaning all 5 kids.
Thank God.
And we took a different strategy, which you'll find very entertaining. We'll talk about that on divorce part 2.
Part 2.
So here's what I'd leave you.
So to answer your question though, really quick, I would say probably it took me about from start to finish, probably like 9 years, because I was 11 when the divorce was really, and then I was about 20 when I was just cool with your wife, your situation, because now you guys have been almost married 10 years. So that was 10 years ago,
year,
right? Yeah. So I feel like once you guys really got married, and I think, that's when I feel healed.
We got married right at the time that you guys were starting your college lives, or were already into them. And so you were kind of already starting to move on with your life. So that the timing was, if it can work that way, it just happened to. We kind of timed things a little bit so that, 4 of you guys were already at that phase of graduating high school into college.
Right.
And so that helped our decision. Here's what I would tell you in this chapter of divorce, and we'll circle back as we get comments and thoughts on it. Remember, and I would always say this whenever we have a podcast, I'll say this, it's your life. You have an opportunity. And while you'll have tribulation in your life, we all will. It's never going to end. Always remember that you have the opportunity to sort of recalibrate and live your life. And while some of these things divorce is a horrible thing. There's many other things that people go through that are horrible. But you have to find a way within yourself always to lift yourself up. Hopefully you have some people in your lives that can give you positive reinforcement. It's like eating an elephant, one bite at a time. You have to slowly work your way and climb. It's like when I did that climb up that peak a few years ago, one step in front of the other. As steeper it gets at the top, it's just, you can see it. When I did that 14er, at 14,000 foot.
In Colorado?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was one step at a time, and you're getting to the top and you see the time. It's like it's right there, but it's one step at a time. And that's how you have to really approach life. And that's how you'll maximize your life. And so I would tell you, and like read books, I did go to, I went to a church divorce counseling thing, which I found was helpful. It was free, and I just went there one night, and they had books and stuff they gave me. And
Someone tell you to go?
Yeah, I kind of researched it. There's a lot of stuff. You go online, you can find all kinds of things. Same with the kids. I wasn't sure with you guys if I should, move you into a counseling scenario. I was kind of gauging that based on how you were acting.
Yep.
None of you went into high school and torpedoed your life. You weren't doing, self-destructive things. So that was a positive. Listen, you had a lot of love from your grandparents. Both sets were still involved. And so you guys, I think that helped a lot. I really do. And you knew we were here for you. So I would just say, I'll summarize from a parent standpoint. If you have children, you have a responsibility to make sure the kids are safe, the kids feel secure, all over your own emotions and desires. And again, I had a desire. I wanted to go find somebody, but I had to pause and make sure my stuff was together at home. My kids were tight. They had everything they needed. And then, I could focus on other stuff for myself. I had to stay healthy. I had to stay mentally healthy, physically healthy. I had to make sure I had a job, obviously, to take care of the financial needs. And so, stability is what kids want and need, even though.
And direction and routine.
Yeah. And listen, I still disciplined you guys. I still made sure you had chores. I still made sure
it wasn't a free-for-all.
Yeah, it wasn't. Just because, hey, and a lot of times that happens too. You go over to the other parent's house and they're let's go out to dinner. Here's all this free stuff, because they want to try to make one parent, they pit each other. Some
or the parents like,
too.
I'm going out for the night, and the kid's like, well,
that too,
you're gone for the night. I'm gone
or
for
one,
the night.
one parent is trying to win the, what we didn't get into is how one parent
bribes the other kid
or talks badly about the ex
Yep.
and says bad things. And I really was careful with that. How would you close out? I'll leave it there.
Yeah. I would say, as a kid coming from a divorced parent, I think there was never a time, I was older, right? 10, 11, 12, 13 when it was really happening. That was my pivotal years of going from child to getting expected to turn into an adult/teen, right? You're entering in driving, boyfriends, high school, all these things. So I was really looking for this like really nice foundation, and that all kind of fell to smithereens. And on top of it, I was an outspoken kid. I had a lot to say. I had a lot of energy. So I think to conclude, if you can either relate to that or you couldn't, I think what I did as a kid is I just tried my best to I journaled a lot as a divorce once I was going through the divorce. And it's funny, I'm not a journaler. I never like to really journal that much, but I was really journaling. I still have journals saved. I think that helped getting my emotions out. And I think that's when I really tapped into my deeper passions. I was looking for an escape. And instead of turning to substances and stuff like that, because that always scared me, I think how I really just tried to move on is that's when and I was always passionate about music. We've talked about music in a podcast. I really just dived into finding an escape in art. And I think maybe if you're dealing with some sort of pain that's not divorce or a rejection or a breakup, try to dive into something passionate and drive all your time into that. Because I really got into listening to more music. And I think with that, then, that helped me. And then I got into cheer and track.
You did.
And those really just, I wasn't the best cheerleader and I was pretty good at track, but I was just so like, I'm doing this because it gave me a sense of some sort of foundation and or something to build
camaraderie.
on.
You had a lot of with the cheer. You had a lot of that.
I really turned to that to deal with pain. And I think even now, you know, I went through a pretty bad breakup. Honestly, it really messed me up about a few years ago. I look back and I took it and I went in a negative direction for a hot second. This is where we'll leave it. And it was not the way to go.
No.
Pouring myself into my passions where I started my career, and now this podcast with my dad, other music, acting, all these things have only grown to be so much stronger because I took that pain and that drive, and as soon as it was going negative and I got burned a little bit, I was like, oh no, went positive. So I will just say, if you're dealing with rejection, are healing trauma from rejection, a divorce, or your breakup, whatever. Dating. Take it and drive it.
They are all intermingled. It's funny.
Literally
Stuff we're talking about.
Take it and drive it into something that you can do. You can be so passionate and build yourself up because.
Well, it's good. It's good way to use your energy, even if it's a little bit of anger.
It helps build your self-love.
Yeah. Well, I got back into hardcore cycling again after that because I wanted to be I was so driven after that. So
listen to some Linkin Park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen, great topic, and hopefully you got something out of this, and we'll do another phase in this. We'll hear, I'm sure, from you guys as well. And there's more, and more thoughts have entered my mind as you were talking about things we could cover and get more specific about. But that's kind of an overview.
Right.
And I think you got two perspectives here, obviously from the adult, and then obviously my kid here that went through it. And while I was trying to be observant what was going on, and I think I was, and I think that helped our relationship in the long run and why we're here today. I do feel there were times where I was just sort of just outside of it. And so, but I think then we really kind of bonded differently too as a result, because again, you knew I was in your corner.
You had my back.
And you could lean into me, and so we'll talk about that again. But we appreciate you watching again.
Yes.
It's Set the Standard, the Selden Standard.
Yep. And set your standard
using
standard. Our mistakes and our insight.
Yeah. Well, you probably could give us some standards, and we're open to that. So we wish you all the best out there.
Thank you guys for listening.
Yeah. Peace.
Peace.
Peace.